Oh yeah. Sun is up, the drinks are hot, and now it's time for our first cup. Today, get older, get bolder. So, last week was my birthday. I turned 42, and to be honest, it was a fantastic day. I got to spend some digital and personal time with people that I care about. I got some really nice messages and people singing happy birthday to me, which that feels really good, by the way. If anyone thinks that grown men don't like receiving happy birthday songs in their voice notes or whatever, they're lying. Had some good food. Everything was great, except for the flu, but whatever. I'll call it a win. And actually, I've liked my birthday since I was a kid. Now, arguably, you know, back then there was Showbiz Pizza and all of the cool video games and animatronics and the cake, like the chocolate cake that was so moist with the amazing cream cheese like frosting, which I have not been able to find replicated anywhere. By the way, if you know where that stuff is, send it to me. Send me a recipe. I still dream about that stuff, but it wasn't just because of that. As a kid, I became kind of attached to my birthday because it was something that was mine, right? In the circumstances that I had growing up, didn't have a lot of stuff that was like just specifically for me. I grew up in a household of hand me downs and hand me ups and hand me sidewayses, right? Books, toys, games, clothing, whole nine yards. But my birthday was never something that I was expected to like hand off to somebody or to receive from somebody else. So always liked it. Um, so you can imagine that later on, I found out, much to my surprise, that a lot of people didn't like their birthdays. They didn't like getting older. Hmm. And some people, there was always a complaint, right, about age, like, oh, you're too young for this, or you're too old for that, or you've heard it all before. You've existed on this planet. You've heard it all, right? When I went to when I did my undergraduate stuff a long time ago, I found out some other stuff too. Like the older people get, the more conservative they get, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean politically, although that can happen as well. It means more in terms of like what they do and, kind of how they interact with the world and how they interact with themselves even, right? They tend to get more, they get less risk taking, right? Whether it's with money or with their health or with their bodies, right? They tend to be more niched down. They get kind of narrowly viewed, more narrow view of the world. And what's more, uh, it's not only that people's actions get that way, but their beliefs about themselves also tend to get more conservative too. Like in a lot of cases, people actually believe that they're capable of less as time goes on. And you know, young Ian, young collegiate Ian, he was not very happy about this, right? Um, because you always hear youth is wasted on the young. But from my perspective, experience was being wasted on the aged, right? Like, got all these people with all these resources and all this experience. It's like, why aren't you doing more? And I'm not saying, I wasn't asking for people to be doing the stuff that I was doing, like, go and be in terrible, like, punk and metal bands or, whatever. Just why aren't you, like, why? Right? And in these last couple of years, I've started becoming the age that the younger version of myself would ask, like, "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing? Why aren't you doing more? Are you doing more?" And I can confidently say at this point that if younger me interrogated present me, I'd be able to say, "Yeah, I actually have done a lot. I've done things that even you, young Ian, would not think are possible or would not think are on your path." Right? And I've been able to do that because I learned this secret years ago. And I'm not exactly sure where. Maybe it came from a bunch of different places, but I want to share it with you now. And that secret is that your limits and your capabilities, they're totally separate from each other. 100%. I want you to think about that for a second. Like your limits and your capabilities are separate from each other. Nothing really to do with each other. Right? Because in a lot of ways, limits are about things that we absolutely can't do, right? Like the example that I always give is, you know, I can't be in the National Basketball Association. I cannot play uh, professional ball. I'm too old. I'm too short. Got too much weight, and I'm not peak athlete. Hell, even when I was a peak younger version of myself, I wouldn't have been able to be in the NBA. And that's a very kind of black or white understanding of the world, which is understandable, right? Like you can't do this thing. But just because you can't do something doesn't mean you're not capable of a whole lot of other things, right? It doesn't mean that we have to constrain what we think we're capable of by these black or white go no go situations, right? Um, and I had an example very near and dear, very personal to me. Example of this when my dad got sick, right? So for those of you who don't know, my father got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in July 2019. And by the end of November 2019, he was dead, right? Very, very fast diagnosis to death. And yet, in those 4 months, I saw him grow intellectually, emotionally, socially, inter just I saw him grow and I saw him communicate in ways that I had never seen my entire life of knowing him. And this man was doing this while his body was literally eating itself, right? He was doing it while he had tumors in his head that if they weren't kept in check could literally alter his perception of the world or his personality. And he still chose to go and reconnect with people that he hadn't talked to in decades. He chose to talk more openly about his past with his family than he ever had. I saw him more expressive than I'd ever seen in my entire life. And I saw this even when he was like in his deathbed in hospice in the last like month of his life, right? Like he was still, I mean, he always cracked jokes, but he was still cracking jokes, but he was still trying to be present and trying to be um more literally while he was dying. And it was inspiring, right? And I've always believed that we don't have to be limited by our limits, right? I mean, I've always believed that I don't have to be limited by mine. And I get it. It can be really hard to remember that sometimes. Like, every so often, the knee that got banged up when I got hit by a car at 21, or Jesus, 19, God, long time ago. Um, every so often it reminds me that, hey, did you know you got hit by a car when you were a teenager? I'm like, oh yeah, I did. But that doesn't stop what I can do with the rest of me on any given day, right? I fight my ADHD sometimes. I fight all the stuff that came along with that. I fight the imposter syndrome that comes from being in a PhD program and being an entrepreneur and starting businesses and failing businesses. But none of that defines my capabilities. And none of the things that are going on in your head or your heart or your body define your capabilities either. And because I know it can be hard to remember that sometimes, that's why when I wish someone a happy birthday, I also remind them to get older, get bolder. Now, please remember that no matter what you've heard or what I've said, death comes for us all, and a closed mouth never gets fed. Take care of yourself. Be bold. And we'll talk again soon.